Another an element, and I can't remember whether that was you filmed some of that or talk with some of the American business folks there, and I think back also in the United States. But an element that we thought was really great in the story is you talked about kind of the complexity of the position and the role of U.S. companies there. That we've all heard an awful lot about the complaints U.S. companies make about access to the Chinese market, forced joint ventures, fear that their intellectual property is going to be stolen, and those issues. But at the same time, they don't want to go public because they're afraid of retaliation. They don't want to give. You talk about they didn't want to give the U.S. government kind of the evidence that the government could either take to the Chinese government or WTO or whatever to sort of press the case because it's a huge market and they want access. So there's a sort of two-sided role they're playing, and that's gotten coverage in the business press over the years, but it's rarely talked about, in these very simplistic stories in the general media about, the US versus China. And I'm curious sort of how you kind of came about, was that something you knew about beforehand or you sort of discovered it in your reporting? What made you decide to make that a larger element of the story, and how did you get at that part of the story?
I think that part of the story was one of the more shocking things that we learned along the way, was simply how complicit the U.S. business community had been in its own demise when it came to China. So they were sort of almost willing participants on the one hand, and then giant complainers on the other hand. And some of the questions that we asked repeatedly was, how do you get to be both at the same time? And I think that to this day that a lot of American businesses want both. They want to be able to say, this isn't fair, our stuff is getting stolen, or we're not getting equal partnership in these companies. But at the same time, they still want to be in China actively selling, and they don't want to, they want to keep that on the down low. They want to hide behind, they want to hide behind the US government, which what the officials told us was essentially tying the US government's hands, because they can't do much about it if nobody's willing to come forward. So it seems like for almost 20 years, they sort of went around chasing their own tails in a way. So where there was an opportunity from time to time for the US government to come out strong, they were often hand-tied by the businesses themselves not willing to come forward. Even when you saw just incredibly sort of egregious break-ins through cyber situations, like the Google hack, 10 years ago, nobody was willing to come forward to say that this had happened to them. And there were, 20, 30 companies involved in that, and only one came forward. So they, when we were walking around the expo, you could feel it, you could sense it from them. GE and these other companies, they want to talk about how amazing this experience is. At the end of the day, it's engines for airplanes and 1 billion buttons. I mean, who doesn't want to sell 1 billion buttons? So I think that they're hoping that somebody else will resolve this problem, and then they'll keep being able to sell the material. But I think that even in our stories and in all the companies that we reached out to, none of them wanted to go on the record with us either about that.
So I was going to say, Jane, you had asked kind of how we came into this question of looking at business. And, one of the initial questions when we got into this, this was a trade war. So immediately it was about business. But as we started to peel back that history, it was clear that, it was much bigger than just, obviously soybeans and steel. Almost every major American company was doing business in China, and China represented the growing market for them. And, our team is often sort of focused on the intersection of, business and politics and how that plays out. And so it was kind of a natural question to say, okay, well, how is this playing out for different kinds of businesses, the kind of businesses that aren't in that headline? And, what we found was that it was, Laura, as you said, impossible to get any of these folks to talk to us. We had initially said, okay, let's follow a company, let's have somebody on the inside sort of take us through what this means, kind of the way that we were actually able to do in China with the electric vehicle factory that we visited, where we had, the head of the company talk to us about what this meant. And US business wasn't willing to go there. And that to us sort of signaled how important that was as a story. And as we talked to policymakers, they had, run up against this same problem, that they would have people come in, talking, to the president in the Oval Office about the challenges that these business leaders were facing, and then, not being willing to go public, which really made it difficult in part for there to be sort of stronger action on the way that China was treating US business. So, that then became a story we felt like we needed to tell, the fact that business wasn't willing to step out. And, ultimately that was the story that James McGregor was able to, help us convey along with others as a representative of business, because, much like a lot of businesses in the US, they have a representative, they don't want to speak for themselves. And in China, it's like every business has the Chamber of Commerce speak for them to keep that anonymity.
Yeah, he's the guy. He was the head of the American
Chinese Business Council, Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah,
Yes.
And I thought it was
Cham.
I've been seeing reports by them for 10, 15, 20 years. As Patty mentioned, I was at Business Week for a long time, making exactly this point, but it's always general. It's never this specific company. It's the general thing. So it seems like, yeah, as you said, they kind of want to hide behind the broad group, but that's not enough to actually change policy.